Well, good morning, everybody. It's great to see you all this morning. Before we get started, I did just want to say that if you're on the fence between coming to the Christmas program tonight or doing something else, I would just really encourage y'all to come out and just be able to witness that. I've been able to see a few of the practices. I'm helping with the lights upstairs, and it's it'll be entertaining. You'll laugh, but at the center of it, like Matt said earlier, it really is the gospel. So I would just really encourage y'all to bring somebody with you and just come out and just fellowship and just see how hard these kids have worked. And at the end of the day, just see the gospel presented in such a powerful way. So I want to start today off with a quick little story. So this past summer, as most of y'all know, Alexis and I got married, but about a month before that, she had set up an appointment so that we could go get our marriage license figured out and everything. So she told me, it's like, all right, hey, we have this appointment tomorrow. It's at like 3 o'clock. You need to have your birth certificate, your driver's license, and your social security card. I was like, okay, sounds good. I'll get it tomorrow. She was like, well, you should probably get it today so that you know you have it all together. And, you know, being a typical guy, I was like, I'll get it tomorrow before we go. So it was about 10 minutes before I had to leave, and I was like, oh, yeah, I got to get all that stuff. So I started kind of getting it together, and I found my birth certificate, I had my driver's license, and then I started looking for my social security card. And you guessed it, I had no idea where it was. So my younger brother, he was with me at the time at home, and I said, hey, dude, like, you got to help me out here, because if I don't find this thing, it's not going to be good. Like, I don't know if this whole wedding's going to happen or not. You know, like, we better figure this out really quick. So he was like, all right, let's look for it. So we started looking at different places, and we have these folders that have, you know, important stuff in them. So we started looking through some of those folders, finding all this tax stuff or whatever else. I was like, all right, I'm going to go look in my room. And he was like, hey, don't worry about looking in there. I've already checked. And I was like, okay, sounds good. I'll go look, you know, over here in my wallet again. He was like, no, I've already checked there too. I was like, okay, well, I guess I won't waste my time looking through there to try and find that. And the reason I start there is because that's what King Solomon is going to do for us today. He's going to tell us, hey, the life you're looking for, the happiness that you're looking for, it's not here, and it's not here, and it's not here. He doesn't necessarily tell us, hey, it's over here, so it's not all that helpful, but at the same time, it's kind of crazy to keep looking over again and over again into these same places where somebody has already told us, hey, it's not in there. I titled this message, The Pursuit of Happiness, because this is really what Solomon was doing during his reign throughout history. And I think this is really an idea that's super ingrained in our culture. I mean, I'm a history major in college. Like, I love American history. I'm super grateful for what our forefathers did, and the fact that we're even able to worship here today is amazing. But even in the Declaration of Independence, it says life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Like, this is what we're designed, so we think, to go out and do. We think that we have to go out and pursue happiness in all these different avenues and all these different routes. But what Solomon is going to show us today is that, hey, maybe it's not in the places you think it is. We live in a culture that also increasingly tells us, do anything you want to do as long as it makes you happy, or find something to do that makes you happy. Like, it seems like happiness is the goal of our lives. So that's why I want to start it here today. But in order to truly understand what Solomon's talking about in Ecclesiastes, which is where we'll be today, you have to first understand Solomon himself. So King Solomon, he is for sure 100%, he's a real person. Even secular websites, you know, tell us this. And he was David's youngest son. David and Bathsheba gave birth to King Solomon. So David's nearing the end of his life. He was a good king. He was a man after God's own heart. He led the Israelites well. And then he gets to the point in his life where he's about to die. And he looks at his youngest son. He says, you are going to be the next king. So I give you a charge, and that charge is to keep the law of God and to follow him at all costs. And Solomon says, yeah, I'll do it. So then we're going to pick this up really quick just to give you a little bit of background. And this is 1 Kings 3 if you want to go back and read it later. So Solomon, he's just gained control of of the Israelites, and he's a little bit stuck. He doesn't really know what to do. History tells us he's about 20 years old at the time, so this is what it says, starting in verse 4. The king went to Gibeon to offer sacrifices, for that was the most important high place. And Solomon offered 1,000 burnt offerings on that altar. At Gibeon, the Lord offered Solomon during the night in a dream, and God said, "Ask for whatever you want me to give you." Solomon answered, "You have shown great kindness to your servant, my father David, because he was faithful to you and righteous and upright in heart. You have continued this great kindness to him, and you have given him a son to sit on his throne this very day. Now, Lord my God, you have made your servant king in place of my father David, but I am only a little child, and I do not know how to carry out my duties. Your servant is here among the people you have chosen, a great people, too numerous to count or number. So give your servant a discerning heart to govern your people and to distinguish between right and wrong, for who is able to govern this great people of yours?" The Lord responded that he was pleased with Solomon, and he asked for this. So God said to him, "Since you have asked for this, and not for long life or wealth for yourself, nor have you asked for the death of your enemies, but for discernment and administering justice, I will do what you have asked. I will give you a wise and discerning heart, so that there will never have been anyone like you, nor will there ever be again." So we see how Solomon, he comes off to God and he says, "God, I can't do this on my own. Like, I have to have your help here. So more than riches, more than fame, more than anything else, I need a discerning heart and wisdom." And God looks at him and he says, "Yes, that's exactly what I was hoping you would say. Because you asked for this, not for yourself, but for my people, I will give it to you liberally." And he did. But as I've studied through 1 Kings, you can just see over time how Solomon, he started that way, but over time it's almost like he got bored with being happy and being content in God, and he starts to drift away a little bit, and he starts to get further and further away until it finally reaches a point of, where it talks about in 1 Kings chapter 11. And I'm going to read this just to give us a little bit of context. And at this point, he was about 60 years old, so he had been ruling over Israel for about 40 years at this time. And this is what it says, starting in verse 1. King Solomon, however, loved many foreign women besides Pharaoh's daughter, Moabites, Ammonites, Edomites, Sidonians, and the Hittites. They were from nations about which the Lord had told the Israelites, "You must not intermarry with them, because they will surely turn your hearts after their gods." Nevertheless, Solomon held fast to them in love. He had 700 wives of royal birth and 300 concubines, which is like a wife, but it's just not as legally binding. And his wives led him astray. As Solomon grew old, his wives turned his hearts after other gods, and his heart was not fully devoted to the Lord his God, as the heart of David his father had been. He followed Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Sidonians, and Molech, the detestable god of the Ammonites. So Solomon did evil in the sight of the Lord. He did not follow the Lord completely as David his father had done. So you see the transformation here really in 6 chapters of the Bible, of how he goes from telling God, like, "I can't do this without you," to now he's wanting to try to do it on his own. He thinks that he can handle it all by himself. He started to pursue happiness rather than pursuing God. And I think this is a lot of what we do as well. And he writes this experience down in Ecclesiastes chapter 2, and that's where we're going to be today. And this is the wisest man that ever lived per all records, whether, secular or biblical. And this is what he has to say about the pursuit of happiness and the places where happiness is not found, so that we don't have to waste our time looking for the happiness that we desire in these places. So Ecclesiastes chapter 2, starting in verse 1, this is what he says. He says, "I said to myself, 'Come now, I will test you with pleasure to find out what is good.' But that also proved to be meaningless. Laughter, I said, is madness, and what does pleasure accomplish? I tried cheering myself with wine and embracing folly, my mind still guiding me with wisdom. I wanted to see what was good for people to do under the heavens during the few days of their lives. I undertook great projects. I built houses for myself and planted vineyards. I made gardens and parks and planted all kinds of fruit trees in them. I made reservoirs to water groves of flourishing trees. I bought male and female slaves and had other slaves who were born in my house. I also owned more herds and flocks than anyone in Jerusalem before me. I amassed silver and gold for myself, the treasure of kings and provinces. I acquired male and female singers and a harem as well, the delights of a man's heart. I became greater by far than anyone in Jerusalem before me. In all this, my wisdom stayed with me. I denied myself nothing my eyes desired. I refused my heart no pleasure. My heart took delight in all my labor, and this was the reward for all my toil. Yet when I surveyed all my hands had done and what I had toiled to achieve, everything was meaningless, a chasing after the wind. Nothing was gained under the sun. So I want to point out a few things to you today, and the first thing I want to point out is that happiness is not found in pleasures. He brings us up in the first 3 verses here. He says, I tried to look for happiness in all these different kind of pleasures, and it just wasn't there. And let me just say that there's a difference between something being fun and something truly bringing you happiness. I think that a lot of these pleasures that he talks about and that we indulge in, they're fun in the moment. It can be exhilarating in the moment, but fun is a short-term jolt of joy, whereas happiness is a long-term satisfaction of contentment, of happiness. So Solomon had every kind of pleasure at his disposal that you could possibly ever imagine. In verse 2, he starts out with laughter. He says, I tried laughter, and that ended up being meaningless as well. And I love to laugh. The Bible tells us that laughter is a good thing. A lot of the things that we read about today, they're going to be, good things really. But once you start looking for happiness in these different places, that's when it'll leave you empty. And this is exactly what happened with him. I think what he's talking about here when he says laughter, I love to laugh. I love to make people laugh. I love good jokes and all that good stuff. But I'm sure you've probably been around the type of person where everything is a joke. Like everything is just funny. They can't take anything at all seriously. And the truth is, over time, if you just keep doing this, it gets kind of old. It's not funny anymore. You're just doing it just to do it. Then he moves on to wine. He says, I tried to find satisfaction through wine. And as we just read, this guy, he didn't just have a bottle or two of wine. He had the vineyards. He had it all. So he could fill himself with as much as he could possibly handle to see if that could possibly fulfill him. And he says it was meaningless. The truth is that Solomon, and we know this from Scripture, he loved to party. He loved the party scene. He loved to have as many people over as he could possibly have and just kind of party for days and days. And what's interesting about that is the way our society is set up. It says that if you have any problems, you can just party the pain away. You can numb the pain away. But Solomon tells us that while it may be fun in the moment, it will never truly lead you to happiness, because if it could, then he would have experienced this. Even pleasure through relationships, whether it be family or, a wife or a girlfriend or a boyfriend or a husband or whatever it is, won't truly lead you to happiness. Solomon had 700 wives and 300 concubines. He had 1,000 different women that he could have relationships with, and none of them truly brought him happiness. Let me just say, I'm very thankful and grateful that I married Alexis. I love her to death. But at the same time, if she tries to find satisfaction and happiness through me, and likewise I through her, we're both going to be left completely empty by the end of it. One of the greatest pieces of advice that I heard before we got married that really stuck with me is that somebody told us that you have to stop pursuing each other and start pursuing God together. And that's when it truly kind of hit me of what a biblical marriage was supposed to look like. So we've seen that it's not found through laughter, it's not found through wine or parties or even relationships. And the truth is that don't we know that chasing after pleasure and being able to get some of this pleasure will only lead you wanting more pleasure? For example, if we went out to a really nice restaurant and we had great service and it wasn't too expensive and the food was great and we left, it's not like you would say, well, that's the last time I ever need to eat there, right? You're going to say, no, let's go back tomorrow. That was really, really good. It's the same way with pleasure. This is why Solomon ended up the way he did is because he kept wanting more and more and more, because he was trying to find his happiness in these different pleasures. Meaningless in this chapter, you hear a few different times. You hear it throughout the book of Ecclesiastes about 30 times. That word meaningless is translated in the Hebrew as havel. And what havel means, translated directly, is like vapor or smoke. So you can imagine what he's saying here. It's like you're trying to grab on to this vapor or this smoke, and you see it for a second, and you think you can grab it, but right when you think you can grab it, it disappears because it doesn't bring you everlasting joy and everlasting happiness. Then he continues in verse 4, it says, I undertook great projects. I built houses for myself and planted vineyards. I made gardens and parks and planted all kinds of fruit trees in them. I made reservoirs to water groves of flourishing trees. I bought male and female slaves and had other slaves who were born in my house. I also owned more herds and flocks than anyone in Jerusalem before me. I amassed silver and gold for myself and the treasure of kings and provinces. I acquired male and female singers and a harem as well, the delights of a man's heart. So my second point to you today is that we know happiness is not found in pleasures, but he also tells us that happiness is not found in materials or money. You see, when Solomon talks about his house here that he made, it says, I undertook great projects, I built houses. Like, it wasn't just your two-story brick house with a fenced-in backyard. We actually have a picture of his palace. So that is the best that we can come up with today based off of the dimensions that we're given and everything. So you look at that, like, that's not just a house, okay? That is a fortress. That's a palace. So he had that. He didn't just have what we have today when we think of houses. It took about 13 years to build this, which is supposed to sound like a long time, except when you think about today, when you think about they've been trying to build Highway 16 for like 13 years too, but so I don't know what the deal was back then. I guess I just had more people working, but it took him about 13 years to build this, which was even longer than the temple that he had built. So then he moves on and he says that he made reservoirs to water groves of flourishing trees. Here's the crazy thing about these reservoirs, okay? These reservoirs are still here today, 3,000 years later. We have a picture of an aerial view of today. I don't know how well you can see it, but those are still there, original. Like, it's cute that we have swimming pools, right? They're not going to be there 3,000 years from now. Like, these things are still here today. You can go visit them outside of Jerusalem. So he had all of these different things, and his legacy is still lasting today through them, but at the end of the day, he says it was meaningless. He says, I own herds and flocks. Like, you know, we have dogs and cats, like a pet or two, right? Nah, he owned herds and flocks. This is how other kings from other countries would pay him. They would bring him horses. They would bring him animals. So he owned more animals than you could possibly think of. It says he had singers, right? He had people that would sing for him. Like we have Apple Music or Spotify. Like he had the real life people in his living room that would sing whatever he wanted to hear. This is how powerful and how much stuff this guy had. He owned so much silver that 1 Kings tells us that he actually single-handedly crashed the silver market. He owned it all. So if you found silver on the road, it says in 1 Kings that it was worth the same amount as a rock because he owned all the other silver. Even secular websites will tell you that King Solomon is by far the richest person to ever live. It's not even close. His net worth was more than Bill Gates, Elon Musk, and Jeff Bezos combined. And the crazy thing about this is, we read this, and you think about how much stuff he had and how great he was, and if we're being honest, like, this is what we want. Like, this is what we strive to get. This is, definitely what I would want if I was, chasing after my own happiness through these different things. In a sense, this is the American dream. Try to get as much as you possibly can. Try to make it up the ladder, right? This is what we try and do. And the crazy thing is that we've heard time and time again, like, well, you can't buy happiness. But for some reason, we still think maybe you can if you just get enough of it, if you just keep going, maybe it's possible that you can. But Solomon was richer than any of us can even imagine or ever will be, and he says at the end of the day, it's meaningless. It's vapor. It's there for a minute and it goes away. It's not really worth anything eternally. And a lot like pleasures, isn't it well known that when we pursue money and things, that will just lead us to wanting more? I've been keeping up with the MLB off season, right? And all these contracts and everything, and it's actually mind-boggling how much these athletes are getting. But it got me thinking a little bit. It wasn't that long ago when $1 million was like a big contract, right? But then over time, as people started getting more, and then they started getting more, the contracts got bigger and bigger and bigger. And now we have guys who, $2 million would have been a ton to them 20 years ago. But now it's like $350 million, and it's just going to keep growing, and it's going to keep growing because we just want to try to get more to try and fill that void. This idea of not pursuing money in order to make us happy, or not pursuing things to make us happy, is actually, like, we think we understand it, but it's a pretty foreign idea in our culture. I mean, when you hear the term net worth, like, what do we think about? We think about how much money and how much stuff that person has combined. We don't actually think about each person's net worth as a person. We think about how much stuff they've been able to get and how much money-wise they're worth. What Solomon's telling us here is that all of the things and money in the world will never truly be able to bring you true happiness, because if it was possible, he would have found it. So he's saying, hey, no need to look over here, no need to look over here either. But then he keeps going in verse 9, he picks it up. He says, I became greater by far than anyone in Jerusalem before me. In all this, my wisdom stayed with me. I denied myself nothing my eyes desired. I refused my heart no pleasure. My heart took delight in all my labor, and this was the reward for all my toil. Yet when I surveyed all that my hands had done and what I had toiled to achieve, everything was meaningless. A chasing after the wind, nothing was gained under the sun. So my third point today is that happiness is not found in status. And to me, I think this might be the biggest one that we really need to hear. I mean, don't we want to be great, right? Like, isn't that one of our goals in life for most people? We want to be great. Well, Solomon, he was the greatest, both politically and financially, that we have as an example throughout human history. He was actually even so well-dressed that Jesus even mentions how well-dressed he was in Matthew 6. You go check it out. He was so famous that people from throughout the world would come and just to hear him talk. Like, they would just sit there and listen to him talk. So if you're expecting being great to fulfill you and make you happy, you'll be left empty every time. And again, it might bring you a little bit of satisfaction in the moment. Like, I can think back to a time in my life where this was me, and to an extent, like, I'm still wrestling with this today. But about 3 years ago, my first year playing baseball up at Lenore Ryan, about every day I would wake up, I would say to myself, all right, let's go be great today. Like, let's go be great. Strive, strive, strive. Try to be the best student you can be. Try to be the best athlete you can be. And what happened is that we went to go play, I would call him a rival, but we went to go play Catawba, and Catawba always beats LR. Like, LR never gets to beat Catawba. And they had just talked my head off all week about, oh, Catawba never loses, Catawba this, Catawba that, and Catawba was ranked about number 8 in the country at the time. So I went out, and for whatever reason, that one day, I pitched out of my mind and threw a no-hitter against Catawba. So in that moment, that was awesome, candidly. Like, that week was crazy. I was getting texts from people who I hadn't talked to in years. I was getting shout outs on social media from people I didn't even know. It was crazy. I was doing, different kind of interviews and stuff, and I was like, this is it, right? Like this is what I've been wanting. But the problem with that is that it kept going. Like the season kept going. I had to go pitch again, right? The clock kept turning, and what happens over time, people forget about that. That doesn't last. That feeling of satisfaction, of joy in that moment, it doesn't last. 3 years from now, there's nothing left with that except I have a ball that says I threw a no-hitter. That's it. Like the feeling of happiness in that moment isn't left anymore. But the truth is, we live in a status-obsessed world. Like this is crazy if you really think about it. Every time somebody asks you, like, where are you going to school? What are you studying? What kind of job do you have? Where do you live? What kind of car do you drive? It's not so much about your answer as it is about them trying to place a status on you and figure out where you lie in the socioeconomic chain, so to speak. But what's funny is that I was able to find these quotes about people that we would think of as being great in our terms, and this is what they have to say about what being great is really like. First guy is Tom Brady, right? He's considered the greatest football player of all time. And he was asked in a 60 Minutes interview about all of his success and how does it make him feel and all that. And he just looked at him and he said, well, it's good, but there's got to be something more than this. And we find him at 45 years old, and he's still trying to pursue greatness in order to make him happy. And it's really a sad, sad thing if you really think about it. Next guy, Brad Pitt, he said to Rolling Stone in an interview, and this is really good, don't miss this. He said, man, I know all these things are supposed to seem important to us. The car, the condo, our version of success. But if that's the case, then why is the general feeling out there reflecting more isolation and desperation than loneliness? If you ask me, I say toss all this. We got to find something else. I don't have those answers yet. The emphasis now is on success and personal gain. I'm sitting in it and I'm telling you that's not it. I'm the guy that's got everything I know. But I'm telling you, once you got everything, then you're just left with yourself. I've said it before and I'll say it again. It doesn't help you sleep any better, and you're not any better when you wake up because of it. Jim Carrey, he just says that everybody should get rich and famous and do everything they ever dreamed of so they can see that's not the answer. All of these guys, including Solomon, would what we consider great. But that doesn't solve the fact that being great, even an extended time of being great, never fulfilled them. It never truly made them happy. Solomon goes on and he says that he was able to fulfill every desire that he had. And a lot of times I think that, what would happen if that was us? Like if every desire we had we could get, because I think that a big lie that gets tossed around a lot today is like, well, if I just had blank, then I would finally be happy. Like this is what the pursuit of happiness is truly all about. But that's not always the case as seen in this text. Solomon, he had everything he could possibly have, everything that we can't even imagine about. And he says at the end of the day, it was meaningless. So in summary here, happiness is not found in pleasures. Happiness is not found in materials or money. And happiness is not found in status. I prepared kind of a similar message for the little Fields of Faith thing that I did, and I did it. I thought it'd be a good message for our young people to hear. But then after I got done with that, I just felt like God was kind of calling me to dig a little deeper on this. So I started reading through 1 Kings and looking at Solomon just as a whole, and I never really realized how much I mirrored Solomon in a lot of different ways in his downfall. And the interesting thing about it is I don't know if Solomon really knew what he was doing at this time, like as he was falling away from God. Because if I would have been y'all today and sat through this, I would have left, 3 years ago saying, well, that doesn't really apply to me. I'm not chasing after that stuff. Well, that's just because I had never actually been able to get it. And my point is I just don't want us to miss today is that it's not just about saying, well, yeah, I'm pursuing happiness through these different things, but we've been talking a little bit about, like, what's your why? Like, what is driving you every day? When your alarm goes off and your feet hit the floor, like, what is the first thought that pops into your mind that you got to do, that you got to strive for? Because for a long time for me, it was I got to strive and go for me. It was about me being great. It was about me having a lot of different things. But what this little study I've been doing has showed me is that I didn't even realize that's what I was doing in that moment. So I'm hoping that this message is a little bit of a wake-up call to some of us to be like, hey, even though you might not have been able to really, get these things that we're chasing after, like it's not found there. The funny thing is that the Bible tells us that if you are truly born again, like Matt's been talking about the past few weeks, then you are actually kings and royalty. But I think so often we do exactly like Solomon has done, right? We come to God and we say, hey, like, I can't do this on my own. Like, you're the only way for me. Jesus, I know he died for my sins. I want to be able to spend eternity with you forever. And God looks at us and he says, yes, my child, you are now royalty. And we say, that's great. But then over time, we start to look for satisfaction and for happiness in these other places. What God is telling us here is to stop looking in these places for fulfillment, contentment, and happiness. So to finish up my story that I started with, we had looked and looked and looked, and finally I had to make the call to Alexis to tell her, hey, I can't find this Social Security card. We might have to try something else. Needless to say, she was not too happy about that because the appointments were a little bit far out. And I was like, all right, well, let me keep looking. I got 2 or 3 minutes here to keep looking, and then I can still make it on time. And I was like, okay. So I kept looking, and what I realized was the whole time we actually had a folder that was labeled Social Security cards that I had neglected to look in. And I think this is what we do as believers. We know where happiness and contentment is truly found. We know it. It's labeled there. It's right here. But yet, we want to keep looking in all these different places. And at the end of the day, what we're doing is we're wasting our life. We're wasting our time that we have here on earth to truly make a difference and make an impact for the kingdom. Maybe you're here today and you're not truly born again. Well, the truth is, and I say this out of love, but what the Bible tells us is that everything you do on this earth at the end is meaningless. It has no meaning without God. God gives everything meaning. I would encourage you truly to go and read Ecclesiastes 1 and 2 as a whole, and you'll see the heart of Solomon here and just about how all these things that we try to do, our legacies we try to leave, and everything else is really meaningless without Jesus. In the end, Jesus is the only way we can find any happiness or satisfaction in this life. For centuries, Greek philosophers would sit outside the city, and they would ask this question. They would look around and they would say, "What is the logos of life?" And if you know what logos means, it translates as word, but it also translates as reason. This is what they were asking. They were saying, what is the point of all this? Every single day we get up, we do the same thing over and over. This routine of life. Like, what's the point? What's the purpose of us being here? What do we strive every day for? Well, the Bible is so kind for us to actually answer this in John 1. It says, "In the beginning was the Logos, and the Logos was with God, and the Logos was God." Jesus is the reason. And I think it's so easy to forget that, especially this time of year. Like we say, yeah, Jesus is the reason for the season, right? But we get caught up in the presents and the family stuff and everything else. But the truth is, the Bible tells us that Jesus truly is the reason any of this matters at all. So I would just ask you, as Paul states in Romans, he says, a lot of people, they worship the created and not the creator. So I'd ask you, is that you today? Are you worshiping the created instead of the creator? Because that was me. I would just urge you to stop neglecting your relationship with God in exchange for the things of this world. The place where true happiness is found is only through abiding with God daily. And I would just sincerely beg you to stop pursuing happiness and start pursuing God, because that's the only way you will be able to ever find any meaning in this life. Because if it was found in any of those places we looked at today, Solomon would have found it, but he didn't. So I just want to leave you with that today. And with that, I'm going to close us out in a word of prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for this day. Thank you for this opportunity to just speak your word. I just pray that you would use this story of King Solomon and just his life and everything that you have recorded for us today to just truly impact our lives and help us to realize that there's no need to look for life outside of you. We know that you're the only one that can give any of this meaning. Without you, it's all just empty. I pray that that would just truly sink into our minds today and just affect our lives, because we can know it all day long. We can recite it, we can listen to it, but at the end of the day, if we don't actually do it and put it to practice in our lives, then it's all worthless, it's all meaningless. So I would just pray that we would just change our why. We should change our goal in this congregation today, and instead of chasing after the things that the rest of the world chases after, instead chase after you and allow you just to have final say over our lives. And I pray all this in Jesus' name. Amen.